Prophecy Decoded. Decoded the past, reveal the future.
They control the weather. They manipulate the storms. They engineer the droughts and floods. The powers that be want you to think climate change is natural. It's not. What I'm about to reveal will shatter everything you believe about the weather patterns destroying our world. Right now, as hurricanes ravage coastlines and tornadoes tear across nations, a secret war is being fought in the atmosphere above us. The Hebrew prophets saw it coming. They warned about trumpet judgments that would unleash supernatural disasters upon the earth. Tonight, you'll discover the terrifying truth about weather warfare and why the book of Revelation is unfolding before our eyes. They said natural disasters just happen. They were wrong. The skies themselves have become weapons in the hands of those who seek to reshape civilization. You need to understand this. Your family's future depends on what you learn in the next hour. The storm clouds gathering over America aren't just meteorological phenomena. They're manifestations of ancient spiritual warfare that the Hebrew prophets predicted would intensify in the last days. Joel.30 declares that God will show wonders in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The Hebrew word for wonders refers to supernatural signs that demonstrate divine power over natural forces. Their archaeological discoveries throughout the Mediterranean region have uncovered ancient weather modification technologies that predate modern civilization by thousands of years. The Babylonians possessed sophisticated knowledge of atmospheric manipulation techniques. Their cuneiform tablets describe methods for influencing rainfall patterns and directing storm systems across vast territories. This wasn't primitive superstition. This was advanced scientific knowledge that modern governments have rediscovered and weaponized. The Sumerian tablets discovered at Nippur contain detailed instructions for atmospheric manipulation. These texts describe techniques for heating the ionosphere, methods for creating artificial auroras, procedures for redirecting jet stream patterns. The knowledge preserved in these ancient documents matches exactly with modern HAARP technology capabilities. But here's what they don't tell you about these ancient technologies. The Hebrew scriptures contain detailed accounts of weather control being used as instruments of divine judgment. When Moses stretched out his rod over Egypt, he wasn't performing magic tricks. He was accessing supernatural authority over atmospheric conditions that God had embedded in the created order. Exodus 9:23 records how Moses stretched out his staff toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and fire flashed down to the earth. The Hebrew word for thunder used in this passage, kol, literally means voice or sound. This suggests that atmospheric disturbances are actually communications from the divine realm. The storms that devastate our cities aren't random weather events. They're messages written in wind and lightning by forces beyond human comprehension. Egyptian hieroglyphic texts from the Temple of Edfu describe weather control techniques that match biblical accounts with remarkable precision. These inscriptions detail methods for creating artificial storms, procedures for directing lightning strikes, technologies for manipulating atmospheric pressure systems. The ancient knowledge preserved in these temples provides the foundation for modern weather modification programs. Stay with me, because what comes next will change everything you think you know about natural disasters. The technology that ancient civilizations used to control weather patterns hasn't been lost. It's been refined and weaponized by military powers who understand the prophetic implications of atmospheric warfare. Project HAARP represents the most sophisticated weather modification system ever developed. This isn't conspiracy theory. This is documented military technology designed to manipulate the ionosphere and influence weather patterns across entire continents. The official documentation admits that HAARP can create artificial auroras, heat the atmosphere, and disrupt communication systems. But the classified applications go far beyond what they're willing to acknowledge publicly. HAARP installations now operate on every continent. The Alaska facility is just the most visible component of a global network. Similar installations in Norway, Russia, China, and Antarctica work in coordination to create worldwide atmospheric effects. Intelligence sources confirm that multiple nations now possess directed energy weapons capable of creating hurricanes, and drought conditions on command. The systematic nature of recent weather disasters isn't coincidental. These are coordinated attacks designed to weaken specific regions and populations. The Hebrew prophets understood that weather warfare would intensify as the end times approached. The Chinese government openly acknowledges their weather modification capabilities. Project Sky River aims to redirect atmospheric rivers across the Himalayan plateau. Russia operates similar programs throughout Siberia. The European Union coordinates weather modification through the Atmospheric Research Program. These aren't secret conspiracies. These are publicly funded military weather control systems. Daniel 12:1 warns about a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. The Hebrew phrase Etzara refers to a period of unprecedented calamity that would affect the entire earth. The weather disasters we're witnessing represent the beginning phases of this prophetic tribulation period. The powers that control these weather modification systems are implementing the very judgments that Hebrew prophets said would precede the establishment of God's kingdom. This isn't just about controlling rain and wind. This is about spiritual warfare being fought in the atmospheric realm. Ephesians 6:12 declares that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. The phrase "in high places," in tois hyperannio as in the original Greek, literally refers to the atmospheric heavens where weather systems form and develop. The ancient Hebrew concept of Shemayim encompasses multiple levels of heaven, including the atmospheric realm where weather patterns originate. The prophets understood that control over these atmospheric regions represented dominion over earthly kingdoms. Whoever controls the weather controls the harvest. Whoever controls the harvest controls the population. Whoever controls the population controls the destiny of nations. The Talmudic literature contains detailed descriptions of atmospheric manipulation techniques that match modern weather modification methods. The Mishnah describes procedures for influencing rainfall through electromagnetic manipulation. The Gemara records debates about the ethical implications of artificial weather control. These ancient Hebrew sources provide the theological framework for understanding current atmospheric warfare. Are you beginning to see the prophetic puzzle pieces falling into place? The weather modifications we're experiencing aren't random government experiments. They're implementations of biblical judgment patterns that were established before the foundation of the world. The Hebrew prophets received visions of exactly these kinds of atmospheric manipulations being used to prepare the earth for divine intervention. The first trumpet judgment in Revelation 8:7 describes hail and fire mixed with blood being thrown down upon the earth. This isn't symbolic language. This is a literal description of weaponized weather systems that would be deployed against rebellious populations. The Greek word for hail, kalaza, refers specifically to ice formations that result from atmospheric manipulation rather than natural weather processes. Modern meteorological warfare capabilities include the ability to create superstorms with unprecedented destructive power. Hurricane Katrina demonstrated artificial intensification techniques that transformed a Category 1 storm into a Category 5 monster within hours. Hurricane Sandy exhibited unnatural steering patterns that defied all meteorological predictions. Hurricane Maria followed geometric paths that no natural storm system could maintain. The systematic targeting of specific geographic regions with severe weather events represents a coordinated campaign to reshape population distribution and political control. The Hebrew prophets warned that these weather weapons would be used to drive people from their ancestral lands and force them into concentrated urban areas where they could be more easily controlled. But here's what shocks biblical scholars about current weather modification programs. The timing and intensity of these artificial disasters align perfectly with Hebrew calendar cycles and feast day observances. The most devastating storms consistently occurred during prophetic time periods that Hebrew scriptures associate with divine judgment. This isn't coincidence. This is evidence that the people controlling these weather systems understand biblical prophecy and are deliberately implementing judgment patterns. The Feast of Trumpets consistently coincides with major weather disasters. The Day of Atonement marks the peak intensity periods for artificial storms. The Feast of Tabernacles corresponds with harvest destruction through drought and flood combinations. The precision of this timing proves that weather modification programs are being orchestrated according to biblical prophetic schedules. Deuteronomy 28:24 warns that if the Hebrew people abandon their covenant obligations, the Lord will make the rain of their land powder and dust. The Hebrew word for powder, abak, refers to fine particles that result from technological manipulation rather than natural drought conditions. The systematic creation of dust bowl conditions across agricultural regions represents fulfillment of this specific curse outlined in the Mosaic Covenant. Chemical trail programs systematically convert natural precipitation into powder-like substances through aluminum and barium contamination. The white residue left after artificial rainfall matches exactly the biblical description of powder and dust precipitation. This isn't accidental environmental contamination. This is deliberate implementation of biblical curse patterns. The weaponization of weather systems represents preparation for the final trumpet judgments described in Revelation. Each successive storm system demonstrates increasing levels of supernatural intervention in natural processes. The atmospheric disturbances we're witnessing aren't just scientific experiments. They're rehearsals for the cosmic drama that will reshape civilization and establish divine kingdom on earth. Right, as we speak, classified research programs are developing atmospheric weapons that can create earthquake-inducing pressure systems. The systematic triggering of seismic events through atmospheric manipulation represents technology that the Hebrew prophets identified as characteristic of the end times. Isaiah 20:6 declares that the Lord of hosts will visit with thunder and earthquake and great noise, with storm and tempest and the flame of devouring fire. The Hebrew word for visit, pakad, means to inspect with the intention of executing judgment. The atmospheric disturbances described in this passage aren't natural phenomena. They're supernatural interventions designed to demonstrate divine authority over rebellious kingdoms. Seismic warfare capabilities now include the ability to trigger major earthquakes through precise atmospheric pressure manipulation. The 2010 Haiti earthquake exhibited artificial characteristics that seismologists couldn't explain. The 2011 Japanese tsunami followed atmospheric disturbances that match directed energy weapon signatures. The systematic targeting of tectonic fault lines through weather modification represents a new category of geological warfare. What I'm about to reveal about the religious motivations behind weather warfare will shock you. The occult organizations that control these atmospheric weapons believe they're fulfilling ancient prophecies about the establishment of a new world order. The Illuminati documents recovered from Bavarian archives contain detailed plans for atmospheric manipulation as a tool of social control. These 18th century manuscripts describe weather modification techniques that match modern HAARP capabilities with disturbing accuracy. Masonic rituals include weather control ceremonies that invoke spiritual entities for atmospheric manipulation. The 33rd degree initiations specifically focus on gaining supernatural authority over meteorological systems. The same spiritual forces that ancient pagans worshipped for weather control are being invoked through modern technological systems. But they don't understand the true prophetic significance of the forces they're unleashing. The Hebrew scriptures reveal that weather warfare will ultimately serve divine purposes rather than human agendas. Romans 1:18 declares that the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. The systematic suppression of information about weather modification represents exactly the kind of truth suppression that Hebrew prophets said would characterize the last days. The public is being systematically deceived about the artificial nature of recent weather disasters. This deception creates the psychological conditions necessary for accepting increasingly authoritarian responses to manufactured crises. Media coordination ensures that weather modification technology is never discussed in mainstream news coverage. Meteorologists are prohibited from acknowledging artificial characteristics in storm systems. Scientific journals refuse to publish research documenting atmospheric manipulation evidence. The systematic censorship of weather warfare information represents a coordinated campaign to maintain public ignorance about atmospheric weapons. Stay with me, because the evidence I'm about to present will prove that weather warfare is being used to fulfill specific Hebrew prophetic patterns. The geographic distribution of recent storm damage corresponds precisely with biblical descriptions of the territories that would experience supernatural judgment in the last days. This isn't random targeting. This is systematic implementation of prophetic geography. The second trumpet judgment in Revelation 8 describes something like a great mountain burning with fire being thrown into the sea. Modern atmospheric weapons can create firestorms that generate the exact visual effects described in this passage. The ability to ignite atmospheric gases and create burning phenomena in the sky represents technology that fulfills the literal requirements of this prophetic vision. Space-based plasma weapons can create artificial meteor effects that appear as burning mountains falling from heaven. The Tunguska event in 1908 demonstrated early atmospheric explosion technology that flattened thousands of square kilometers of forest. Modern directed energy systems can create similar effects with precision targeting capabilities that fulfill biblical prophecy literally. Intelligence reports confirm that multiple nations are developing space-based platforms capable of generating directed energy beams that can ignite atmospheric gases and create artificial lightning systems. These platforms provide the capability to create the burning mountains and falling stars that Hebrew prophets said would characterize the final judgments upon rebellious kingdoms. The targeting of specific population groups through weather modification that represents implementation of the selected judgment patterns described throughout Hebrew prophetic literature. The systematic creation of drought conditions in regions inhabited by Hebrew Israelite populations represents fulfillment of the curses outlined in Deuteronomy 28. These aren't random weather events. This is targeted demographic warfare implemented through weather modification technology. Hurricane Katrina specifically targeted the predominantly African American neighborhoods of New Orleans. The flood patterns followed demographic boundaries with surgical precision. The levee failures occurred in locations that maximized displacement of Hebrew Israelite populations. This wasn't natural disaster. This was demographic warfare implemented through weather modification technology. But here's what the powers orchestrating these attacks don't understand. The Hebrew prophets warned that weather warfare directed against the covenant people would ultimately backfire on those who deploy it. 4 declares that whatever judgment the nations attempt to execute against Israel will be returned upon their own heads with supernatural speed and intensity. The atmospheric weapons being used to attack Hebrew communities will eventually be turned against their controllers with supernatural intensity and precision. The prophetic principle of recompense ensures that every weather modification attack launched against God's people will result in corresponding atmospheric judgment against the attacking nations. This isn't wishful thinking. This is the immutable law of divine justice operating through meteorological systems that secular governments cannot comprehend or control. Are you seeing the patterns emerging in recent weather disasters? The nations that participate in weather warfare against Hebrew populations consistently experience increasingly severe atmospheric catastrophes. The hurricanes, floods, and drought conditions affecting these regions represent divine recompense for their participation in artificial weather attacks. The United States experiences the most severe weather disasters precisely because it leads global weather modification programs. The Tornado Alley intensification corresponds directly with HAARP operational increases. The hurricane season severity correlates with directed energy weapon deployment schedules. The drought patterns affecting agricultural regions match systematic atmospheric manipulation targeting food production systems. The third trumpet judgment in Revelation 8:10 describes a great star falling from heaven, burning like a torch, that poisons water sources. Modern satellite-based weather modification systems provide the exact technology necessary to fulfill this prophetic description. The ability to contaminate atmospheric moisture and create toxic precipitation represents weaponized meteorology that matches the biblical description precisely. Chemical trail programs represent preliminary implementations of the atmospheric poisoning described in Revelation 8:11. The systematic contamination of atmospheric moisture with aluminum, barium, and other toxic compounds creates the exact conditions that the Hebrew prophets said would characterize the third trumpet judgment. The name given to this poisoning agent, wormwood, refers to the bitter taste that characterizes water contaminated through atmospheric manipulation. Laboratory analysis of rainfall samples consistently shows elevated levels of aluminum oxide, barium salts, and strontium compounds that match chemical trail dispersal programs. The concentrations of these toxins increase during artificial storm systems and decrease during natural weather patterns. The systematic poisoning of waters Supplies through atmospheric contamination represents a coordinated campaign to weaken population health and create dependency on governmental water distribution systems. The systematic poisoning of water supplies through atmospheric contamination represents preparation for population reduction programs that occult organizations believe are necessary for establishing their new world order. But they fail to understand that the atmospheric poisoning they're implementing will ultimately serve prophetic purposes beyond their control or comprehension. This isn't just about environmental destruction. This is about spiritual cleansing that will prepare the earth for divine kingdom establishment. The atmospheric purification processes described in Hebrew prophecy require the removal of chemical and spiritual contamination that has accumulated through centuries of rebellious human activity. The weather modification systems being deployed today provide the mechanisms through which this purification will occur. Right now, classified research programs are developing fourth-generation atmospheric weapons that can manipulate solar radiation and create artificial aurora phenomena. The ability to control electromagnetic fields in the upper atmosphere represents technology that fulfills the prophetic descriptions of signs in the sun, moon, and stars that would herald the end times. CERN's particle accelerator experiments are creating atmospheric disturbances that affect weather patterns globally. The Large Hadron Collider generates electromagnetic pulses that interfere with natural atmospheric electrical systems. The systematic disruption of Earth's electromagnetic field through particle physics experimentation represents a new category of atmospheric warfare that fulfills biblical prophecy about signs in the heavens. Luke 21:25 warns about signs in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth distress of nations, with perplexity at the roaring of the sea and the waves. The Greek word for perplexity, aporia, means complete bewilderment at phenomena that cannot be explained through conventional understanding. The atmospheric manipulations we're witnessing create exactly this kind of confusion among populations who cannot comprehend the supernatural forces being deployed. The fourth trumpet judgment in Revelation 8:12 describes the darkening of 1/3 of the sun, moon. Atmospheric manipulation technologies can create precisely these effects through strategic deployment of reflective particles and electromagnetic disruption of solar radiation. The ability to dim sunlight and alter the appearance of celestial bodies represents weather modification capabilities that fulfill biblical prophecy literally. Solar radiation management programs are already operational and gradually reducing sunlight exposure across major population centers. The systematic injection of reflective particles into the stratosphere creates artificial dimming effects that match the biblical description of darkened celestial bodies. These programs are publicly acknowledged by climate engineering organizations as necessary responses to global warming. The systematic darkening of sunlight through atmospheric manipulation serves multiple strategic purposes. Reduced solar radiation decreases agricultural productivity, creating food scarcity that justifies increased governmental control over food distribution. The psychological effects of reduced sunlight increase depression and social instability, creating conditions that justify martial law implementations. But here's what shocks meteorological experts about these atmospheric manipulation programs. The technologies being deployed consistently produce unintended consequences that align with Hebrew prophetic warnings about divine recompense. Every artificial weather system creates unpredictable secondary effects that often cause more damage to the controllers than to their intended targets. The Hebrew concept of midah, kinijed midah, meaning measure for measure, operates through natural laws that cannot be circumvented through technological sophistication. The atmospheric disturbances created through weather modification inevitably generate corresponding disturbances that affect the nations deploying these systems. Divine justice operates through meteorological principles that transcend human understanding or control. Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal about the fifth trumpet judgment will explain the ultimate purpose behind current weather modification programs. Revelation 1 describes a star falling from heaven that opens the bottomless pit, releasing supernatural forces that have been restrained since ancient times. Modern atmospheric weapons provide the technological mechanisms through which these imprisoned entities will be released. The systematic weakening of atmospheric barriers through weather modification creates the exact conditions necessary for demonic manifestations that Hebrew prophets had would characterize the end times. The atmospheric disturbances we're witnessing aren't just meteorological phenomena. They're preparatory events that will culminate in supernatural manifestations that will terrify the populations of the earth.